Jeremiah, a humble black man in his late 50s, had spent years fixing up a quiet lake cabin that once belonged to his late father. For him, it wasn't just wood and stone, it was family history, memories of fishing trips, laughter echoing across the water, and the only true place he felt peace. He paid his dues to the local law like everyone else, never questioning the rules. Little did he know, a storm of injustice was brewing against him. It was a quiet morning by Lake Summerfield, the kind of morning where the mist hangs low over the water and the birds sing their first gentle songs. Jeremiah Williams, a humble man in his late 50s, stood on the dock sipping coffee from an old, chipped mug. His lake cabin behind him wasn't fancy, but to him, it was priceless. The cabin wasn't just a house, it was a legacy. His father had built it with his own two hands decades ago, laying each stone with patience and care. The place held the scent of wood smoke, the echoes of family laughter, and the warmth of generations past. For Jeremiah, this cabin was a living memory of where he came from. Jeremiah worked hard, paid his dues to the local law like every other homeowner, and kept his property clean. He wasn't a man who liked trouble. In fact, he went out of his way to avoid it. But trouble, it seemed, had found him. The law claimed he had failed to pay his monthly fees. Jeremiah frowned, knowing full well he had receipts tucked neatly in a folder inside his cabin. He marched to the office, papers in hand, only to be met with cold stares. Carl Thompson, the WA president, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. "Receipts can be faked," Carl said dismissively. "You're behind, and rules are rules." Jeremiah calmly placed the official stamped documents on the table, but Carl didn't even look at them. The board members whispered to each other, shaking their heads as if Jeremiah's words meant nothing. He walked out that day frustrated, but still hopeful that the mistake would be corrected. But the harassment didn't stop. Soon, violation notices arrived weekly. His canoe was improperly stored. His flower baskets were unapproved colors. Even the way his cabin curtains hung was suddenly against regulations. It was clear, the WA had decided to make him their target. One morning, Jeremiah returned from town carrying groceries. As he reached the bend in the road, he froze. There, in front of him, sat bulldozers. His cabin, the home his father built, was being torn down. The crack of wood, the shattering of glass, the collapse of stone, every sound cut into him like a blade. Jeremiah dropped his groceries and sprinted forward. "Stop, stop," he shouted. "You can't do this." But the workers only shrugged. One of them muttered, "Orders are orders." Carl stood nearby with folded arms, watching like a king pleased with his command. "You didn't pay, Jeremiah. We gave you warnings," he said coldly. Jeremiah's hands trembled as he pulled out his folder again. He waved his receipts, tears streaming down his face. "I paid every fee. Look at the proof." Carl smirked. "Too late. The board voted. Your property is no longer compliant." Jeremiah sank to his knees as the final walls of his cabin crumbled. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. Some felt sorry, some looked away, but none dared to speak against the HOA. That night, Jeremiah sat on the ground where his cabin once stood. Nothing was left but ashes and debris. The air smelled of dust and betrayal. He held a photograph of his father fishing by the same lake decades ago. His chest ached, not just from the loss of the cabin, but from the humiliation. They had stripped him of dignity in front of everyone. For hours, he sat in silence, staring at the moon's reflection. On the water, his father's words echoed in his mind. "We may bend, son, but we never break." And in that moment, Jeremiah decided he would not be broken. He pulled out his phone and made a single quiet call. His voice shook with pain, but beneath the pain was something else, determination. A few days later, the neighborhood awoke to the sound of black SUVs pulling into the street. Doors opened, and out stepped men and women in dark suits. Calm, professional, sharp, Jeremiah's family had arrived, not just any family, federal agents. His nieces, nephews, and cousins had built careers across different government departments, the FBI, Homeland Security, and the Justice Department. They weren't here for show. They were here for truth. The HOA board watched nervously as agents began taking photographs of the demolished cabin, recording testimonies from neighbors, and demanding documents from the HOA office. Carl, once arrogant, suddenly found his voice trembling as he tried to explain himself. But the agents didn't smile. They didn't joke. They were here for business. Over the following weeks, evidence poured in. The HOA had been falsifying fee records, pocketing money, and targeting homeowners they thought couldn't fight back. Jeremiah wasn't their first victim, he was just the one they thought would stay silent. Federal charges stacked up quickly. Fraud, extortion, abuse of authority. The board members, once feared, now sat pale and sweating as agents escorted them out of their office in handcuffs. Neighbors who had been silent before now cheered, clapping from their porches. For the first time, the community felt free. Jeremiah didn't just win the case, he was compensated. Court orders required the HOA to pay damages far beyond the value of the cabin. Insurance and restitution money poured in. Months later, the sound of hammers and saws once again filled the lakeside air, but this time, it wasn't destruction. It was rebuilding. Jeremiah's new cabin stood taller, stronger, and brighter than before. His father's photo was once again placed on the mantel, safe in a frame. At the grand reopening, neighbors gathered to celebrate. Children played by the dock. The smell of grilled food filled the air. Jeremiah stood quietly by the water, his family at his side. As the sun set, Jeremiah looked at his reflection in the water. He thought about the journey, the humiliation, the pain, and the justice that followed. He whispered softly, as if speaking to his father, "You thought they could take our legacy. But family always protects its own." The story closes not with anger, but with hope. Because Jeremiah's fight wasn't just about a cabin. It was about standing up against injustice, about never letting bullies win, and about remembering that truth will always outshine corruption. And the lesson remains clear. No matter how strong an injustice may seem, when you have truth, perseverance, and the support of those who love you, justice will always find its way.